Thank you for joining us for our continued conversation about climate fiction. In the last episode of Climate Changed, Autumn spoke with Tory Stephens. Tory is a storyteller, cultural worker, and climate justice advocate who co-founded Imagine 2200, a climate fiction initiative at Grist. They talked about the prefigurative power of storytelling, the beautiful concept of Thrutopia, and why the climate movement desperately needs more imagination. To ground us today, here's a brief excerpt of what Tory had to say.
Do you know this term Thrutopia?
No. Introduce me.
Yes. So Thrutopia comes from the UK, and the idea is that you're showing us on the way to a better world, but we haven't tackled or changed everything. If you're really leaning into Thrutopia, you'd be getting over some of these things and like moving beyond. There's a problem, here's the solution, but we're showing how we get through that moment, as opposed to utopia, where it's just everything is like better and we're showing the fully abundant world that we're all living in, which is fine. We publish those stories too, but I think more of the stories that we're publishing are this term of Thrutopia, where not everything's been solved. There's still interpersonal relationships where people are living in community with each other. Yeah, a good story that I could give as an example around this is a story called Seven Sisters, where there's these women who are working on a tea farm in a collective kind of space, a farm that they make collective decisions on, and a few of their drones go down, and they have to make this choice between picking the tea on their own by hand, which is very labor intensive, and at the same time they're having like money issues, so they can't fix the drone. And while they're kind of contemplating this issue, their buyer, who is also one of the folks that live on the farm, is in Brazil. And in Brazil, they had had a flood, and there's a family that is displaced. And this woman introduces the idea that she wants to bring this woman and her baby into the collective. And they have this like discussion around, can we feed this family? Can we, like this idea of like, I don't know if we should like bring another human into our like collective, but like there's this moral question, like this is our kind of, this is our way. We need to accept these people. So to show that kind of dynamic, that even in social justice communities where people are in right relationship with each other, there's still going to be hard decisions to make. Even, your drone goes down, you're having financial problems. I would say like the mother of the family is the one saying like, let's think about this. Like, can we really accept like a mom and her baby? That's so hard. But there's a few people that are like, no, we have to do this. Like, this is like the right thing to do. Like, it turns out that and I'm telling like a lot of this story, but I still think it's an enjoyable story, even if I'm telling some of it.
Yeah.
But like turns out that the woman who they bring into the farm can also fix drones. So
that's beautiful. Wow. Oh, I really appreciate you giving an example of one of the stories that y'all published also.
Autumn will join me to talk about some of the themes and challenges around climate fiction that Tory raised. And if you're just joining us, welcome. It's not necessary to listen to the conversation with Tory before listening to this episode. In fact, listening to our reflections first will offer you a unique perspective on that previous conversation. Later in the episode, Autumn and I will also share some next steps you can take, including how you can share your own vision for the future right here on our show. Let's dive in. Oh my gosh, I loved listening to that conversation, and it was such a pleasure to get to hear the two of you. I've been working with Tory for a little bit, and what you surfaced from him was so good. So good.
I'm so glad. Yeah, it's wonderful to, one of the ways that he identifies in his work is as like a network weaver. And so it was sweet to kind of think about the sort of different tendrils of the network reaching across each other, that you and Tory had been doing all this work together, and then I kind of plug into the network.
Totally.
with this particular role. And then, of course, I learned afterwards, after the interview, I learned from him that my sister Adrienne was one of the first judges in the first Imagination 2200 year of the contest.
Woohoo!
And so, right? So, I mean, so many connections, so many beautiful connections. Um, and I was so appreciative to get to start our climate changed conversations with this particular interview, because the role of imagination and storytelling in my own life has been such a powerful part of my work. And I've personally been able to see and witness what gets unleashed in people as a result of engaging in the activity of world building together.
Yeah.
And I really appreciated, it was so interesting talking to Tory about all of this, because, obviously I'm coming in with a particular interest in this conversation in how is culture and how is spirituality specifically represented in the worlds that are being built.
Yeah.
And it was interesting to hear Tory really name directly how one of the problems that he has identified in like the world of people who are writing climate fiction and science fiction in particular, but climate fiction generally, is that so often the world building doesn't take into account the actual internal worlds of the characters, which are made out of their cultural and spiritual practices. And I was thinking how, well, that's actually so reflective of the time that we're in.
Yes. Yes. Totally. It kind of, well, I will say it broke my heart a little bit, because it is the piece that I think the BTS Center is tending to so much, is what is happening to our hearts and our souls right now, and really what is the vision for our hearts and our souls. And so, yeah, I was like, oh, Tory's got to have a whole stack of stories to pass on to me that elucidates that, and maybe he doesn't. So we got to create him. We got to create him, I guess, is what it means.
Yes, exactly. And it was interesting to notice that the connection that he was drawing around the absence of cultural, spiritual, cultural ways, practices from a lot of the climate fiction he was reading, and the connection he made between that and our commitment to an addiction to dystopian narratives. And that in order to imagine, he brought in that lens of the Thrutopia, the sort of imagining how are we making it through to the next phase. That part of how our capacity to imagine a thriving future, there seems to be an answer there that's about our ability to narrate an internal world that is about that, and it supports meaning making.
Yeah. The ending note of the conversation as we heard it, where you were talking about stories as serving to doula our meaning making, that comment really sparked for me as I started to reflect on the many ways the BTS Center has been engaging with fiction and with imagination. This has been a real centerpiece of our work and like every program we do for the past many years. And and sometimes I wonder, well, why that focus? What is that about? And I think it is this doula to meaning making. Stories have been and are for faith communities and spiritual leaders so grounding in how we understand our situation. And to only go into the stories of the ones that are fear inducing to maybe make us act or something, maybe is why we go into those. It does something different to our hearts than going into these stories where we actually are saying, this is the world we want. And yeah, we are seeing signposts, or we have a sense that in some ways what we're headed towards is also something ancient. We always talk about it as new, but the more I think about it, the more it feels like an ancient way of being. I wanted to bring in a quote from an academic article written by one of our research advisors, Susie Mosier. And in this article, she's talking about leadership in times of environmental devastation and what it means to be a climate leader. And she talks about a deliberate practice of visioning in the face of unraveling will be a critically important practice. And I think this is why the BTS Center makes space for this, because a lot of people, a lot of leaders, this is like, maybe they can appreciate that this in theory would be a good idea, but like actually doing it is can be harder to come by. And I wonder if this is true in your kind of artist oriented world as much as it is in my religious leader oriented world. But I would say for religious leaders, yeah, it's kind of a push to get together and say, we're going to spend this next bit of time visioning and imagining. Tory, I've gotten to know actually the best because we decided to do a workshop with him for preachers. And so we had a room full of preachers online, and Tory and his colleagues at Grist led us through creating dream seeds and talking about them and looking at one another's dream seeds. And we ended this workshop. I mean, my heart, I think, was beating faster with actually like a sense of there's so much possibility just around the corner. And
yeah,
I mean, I love doing good work day in and day out, but like this feeling in my heart was different than some other things that we activate. So I really think Susie is right. We need a deliberate practice of regularly visioning positive futures. And I know religious leaders would really, really benefit from it.
I have a question for you about that, Nicole,
Yeah.
because I heard you say that the BTS Center, there was a certain point, it sounds like, in the history of the center where there was a kind of clear decision made to start centering a practice like this. And now there's this focus on narrative as a part of all of the work you all are doing. You know, I think there's a lot of things that our individual communities do that there's plenty of things that are not replicable, but there's plenty of things that actually are replicable. And it might be helpful to, the listener out there who is trying to figure out how do I integrate visioning practices into my community? It actually might be helpful to that person to hear a little bit of the story of how and why the BTS Center made that shift. So I wonder if you could tell a little bit of that story of why did the BTS Center start centering visioning or fiction or narrative as a part of the practice, and how could a listener potentially replicate that in their own community?
What's funny? Imagination came first. Climate change came second. So the BTS Center adopted its mission before adopting its focus on spiritual leadership for a climate changed world. So, and it is actually this mission statement that made me want to work for this organization. So, it's actually really it is really important to me. Our mission is to catalyze spiritual imagination with enduring wisdom for transformative faith leadership. So, catalyzing spiritual imagination actually.
Yeah, what does that mean?
Well, right. The stuff I'm about to talk world. And, of course, as you adopt a new focus as an organization, you wonder, should we update our mission statement? But actually, we felt like that mission was so right to catalyze spiritual imagination. I will say a factor of that is the massive greed we encounter in the way our society organizes itself. I need to catalyze a new and different imagination that's soul focused, that's focused on our hearts and souls. So some of the ways we do that is workshop. We bring in someone who knows how to do great fiction and imaginative work. And we've worked with a few different partner organizations, and we create the time. That was a 3-hour workshop. We were asking preachers and religious leaders to give up basically their whole afternoon to spend time making dream seeds, sharing dream seeds. And our hope is that those ideas filter into the pulpits of every single preacher who was there and perhaps beyond. And I left really energized imagining religious leaders who get an invitation from the state legislature to come offer an opening prayer at their session. this is a thing that actually still happens in the world.
All the time. Yeah.
And disparity. We started imagining dream seeds of how that could be different, how we could be organized just completely differently. So I imagine religious leaders being visionaries in that way, having a concrete, Gris loves this term, dream seed, so I've adopted it. These concrete dream seeds that are informing our way of being. You know, another way we've gotten at this is every summer we do a summer fiction book club, and we read books of fiction and then reflect on them. And
Beautiful.
some of our books that we've picked up are not in the bookstore in the climate fiction section. For example, we read a book called North Woods by Daniel Mason. And what's amazing about this book is the landscape of Western Massachusetts is perhaps the main character. It is not a setting. It is like the main character of the book. And so it's like that mindset shift that we want people to read a story, read a 300-page novel and immerse yourself in it. And then how does that lead you to look at whatever landscape you're looking at differently? You know, what if the landscape outside your window was the main character?
Right.
So I think those are the sorts of things we're playing with, and very regularly. I wonder, how does
and that relates to the quote that you offered, that being a deliberate practice, right?
Yeah.
That I think a lot because I'm a martial artist. I think a lot about discipline,
practice,
and practice. I think a lot about discipline and practice, and that, like, that what makes a practice into a discipline is your commitment to it and your willingness to show up day in and day out to that practice, regardless of whether you want to do it or not, or regardless of whether you feel up for it, or regardless of whether you feel inspired by it. It's like you continue to show up, and then find, in my practice community, I often talk with fellow students about showing up for what is here. Like, are you here for what is here? And in order to know whether you're here for what's here, you have to be willing to show up every day for it, and then receive whatever it is that is actually able to come through the practice. And I think that, like, to me, the practice of engaging in visionary fiction is very similar, because in my experiences, I lead visionary fiction writing workshops very regularly.
Nice.
And in my experience, and in the practice that we do when we're leading these writing workshops, we take people through a process of collectively building a world.
Nice.
And then everyone writes their own individual stories inside of that world. And so we've created a shared reality, and then we're getting to have our individual visions and experiences and stories inside of that reality, right? But what I notice is that being in a deliberate practice of creating new worlds means that I'm available for the wisdom that wants to channel through in relationship to that particular world that's been made. And I think, to me, that is, there's a direct connection there between world building and other kinds of spiritual practice, right? Meditation is the same way. Prayer is the same way.
Totally.
It's like, if you continue to show up for the practice, you're available then for the wisdom that is waiting to be received as a part of, and I think that to me, where all of this connects to living in a climate changed reality, and being, I think for a long time we would all say we're on the precipice of collapse, and now we're in the landslide. You know what I mean? It's like we're all avalanching down the mountain together, and it's a, and when we talk with our guest Norma Wong, we'll talk about the metaphor of the slipstream, like being inside of the moment where things are moving very, very fast. And a lot of things feel either out of control, but also a lot of things feel more possible as a result of that. And I think that being in that new shared reality also requires us to, it's so easy to feel powerless, but actually the thing that's required of us is to find a sense of agency inside of all of that. And I think that practices like what Tory leads people through, this practice of, of putting ourselves in like it's kind of like reclaiming a sense of agency related to the future through fiction.
Which is I think surprising for many, because I think when people think about climate change and like being an environmentalist or something, and they think of discipline and practice, they come to things like composting, which is a discipline and practice in my
And is
home
great to do. Yes.
and is great to do. And people think of writing, I mean, if you're really bold, like writing regular letters, op-eds to the paper, right? Like that's going to be like, I know some people who adopt that as a discipline and a practice. I'm going to like, whatever
Heck
it
yeah.
is, every month, I'm going to write an op-ed. But I think this does not make the surface of a discipline and practice very often for people thinking about the climate changed world that we're in and caring for the environment. It's like, what? A practice would be imagining positive futures for our hearts and souls? I need to, get my compost to the bin.
I need to do something that corrects the current reality, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Because we're sort of trapped in that corrective thinking that what we're trying to do. I think that so many of us are trapped in this corrective thinking that what we're trying to do is fix what's currently happening.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that that's a it's a totally understandable place to be. And I think particularly spiritual leaders, clergy, religious leaders, I think the calling is different in this time is to, I mean, and not saying that we shouldn't be reminding people to compost and recycle and write letters to the editor and all of those things, all of it matters. Like all the forms of political action matter. And you know, the communities that are centered around shared cultural practice they actually are just, they have the capacity to provide a different kind of grounding for people in this time period. And I think that stepping into that calling is kind of one of the requirements. To me, it feels like if you're signing up for spiritual leadership now,
Well,
you know,
I totally think as a leader, as a spiritual leader, to hold this capacity for a vision, for a future that's informed. I mean, it's why I read these novels. It's so that I can be informed by what people are writing as ways that we might be in the future. I also think it offers for anyone and everyone a really powerful form of agency in these times to build our capacity to care and to lean into what's possible. That is a different sort of agency than recycling, and it leans into a different form of identity that I think brings us back almost to where we started with Tory saying, for some reason I'm not seeing the cultural pieces in climate fiction, and maybe it's because it's so linked to science fiction. And I mean, but the idea that we're going to have peace because we're all the same, like bristles against me so much. So that is like not the truth I have found in in engaging with both the ecosystems of the world and the human, like, diverse amazingness of the world. Our peace does not come from being the same. So we need to really, really learn how to gain agency in love and care across wild lines of difference as our human calling. I think it's so possible to find tomorrow. Yeah.
Yeah, to me the image that comes to mind, and I'm not going to get this right in terms of which of the sea creatures are doing this, but the image that comes to my mind is, those like Planet Earth documentary images of like whales underwater that have like, I think, are they like pilot fish or whatever that are there. They're in these like they're in these symbiotic relationships where they require one another in order to move through the ocean together. And I think about that in relationship to this, how we understand the role of not just the role of cultural and spiritual practice, but the role of multiple cultural and spiritual practices being represented in our vision of the world. That actually there's a there's a direct relationship. I mean, it's cliche to say this. I think at a certain point it becomes cliche to say that but maybe it needs to be repeated, that any healthy ecosystem requires diversity, right? And so we actually have to have multiple ways of being and multiple ways of believing in order to actually have a healthy ecosystem of life. And so the
amen,
I
amen,
really,
amen. I think we do need to keep saying it.
We do maybe we do need to keep saying that.
We're not living into it yet.
It's kind of sad, but I guess we do. But it was really telling to me. I really appreciated Tory starting with this place of why isn't diversity and identity showing up in our climate fiction? And it made me think about, and I was talking with him about this a little bit, but I wanted to kind of unpack it a little bit more here with you, that it made me think about how, where do I see cultural and spiritual practice showing up in science fiction or visionary fiction? And I was so pleased that we led off our grounding practice with the quote from the great Octavia Butler. Who for the listener out there who's not familiar with her work, she's passed, but she was a African-American science fiction writer. She was probably the first African-American woman to reach mainstream success as a science fiction writer. And she was a very prolific author. And there was a series of books that she was actively in the process of still writing at the point that she died. But she had published 2 of the books in the series, Parable of the Sower and Parable of the Talents. And they have since become incredibly popular, in part because they prefigured the political moment that we're currently living in very, very specific ways, including the framing "Make America Great Again" shows up in Parable of the Sower and Parable of the Talents, these books that she wrote in the 80s.
So insightful.
And 90s. It's really kind of intense to read it now, but she in this series, she's actively working with, her main character is creating a sort of new spirituality called Earthseed, and really understanding that people living under the conditions that her people are living under have to be motivated by a spiritual vision in order to be able to find their way out of these conditions of persistent terror, violence, and collapse, that without a spiritual vision, there is no way to find hope. And so it's really fascinating to me because after I was reflecting on the conversation with Tory, I was like, right, I can't think of a lot except that the writers that I can think of who are actively dealing with spirituality inside of their work are often women of color, queer folks, folks who are deeply connected to their cultural practices and are writing from that place. And so it really made me think about the ways that the connection between grounding ourselves in spiritual vision and how often our vision for a thriving future actually comes from the margins of the society that we're living in, because it's coming from the places where people are already surviving the conditions of terror and violence that are coming for everyone, but they reach the most marginalized people first, right? That's that frontline orientation.
Yeah, and just to give a shout out to another one of the books that we picked up in our summer fiction book club, we read People of the Whale by Linda Hogan, who is a Native American author. And yes, we need to find the stories that are written from perspectives that have held tight to a cultural, spiritual, meaning-making framework that I do think is so needed in these times. So the character in this book has the ability to breathe underwater. So pick it up.
That sounds helpful.
for a wide range of reasons, including the cultural identity it leads to.
Truly. You know what? It's so funny. Usually when people ask me the question, what superpower would I want to have? I'm like, I wouldn't want a superpower. But now, after you named this, what the main character, I'm like, oh, that is the superpower I would want to have. The ability to breathe underwater.
See, I always say that I want to talk to trees and actually know like their thoughts and feelings. Anyway,
that's
this question is literally the first one that Gris started with at our workshop. was, what climate superpower would you like to have? And so the chat was filled with all these ideas, like breathing underwater and talking to trees.
And talking to trees.
All right. So superpowers feels like a pretty good place to close. We've now identified our favorite superpowers.
I agree.
Listener, you better have in mind what your climate superpower would be. And of course, we would love to hear it. So as we sit with what Tory shared, what Autumn and I have discussed, I wonder how each and every one of you listening might feel called to the work of imagination, embodying the world we long for, and talking about it.
Thank you, Nicole. We call this part Next Steps, where imagination meets practice. It's how we carry these ideas into our shared lives, because the change we need won't happen alone. It grows in community where we talk about it.
So here are a few invitations from today's conversation. I'll add my recommended next step here, which if you were hearing about some of these workshops Autumn and I were talking about, first of all, you could pursue some opportunities with Autumn or with Grist, but something that would be easily accessible to you today would be to log into the BTS Center's Leadership Commons, and you will find there resources for adult education facilitators, people who are leading things in congregations and other communal settings. And there is a particular resource I want to draw your attention to, which is called Creating Your Story of Tomorrow. It is a facilitator guide for the sort of workshop you've been hearing us talk about. It's something you could lead in your setting. It was created, of course, by an artist, but created by renowned environmental artist Eve Mosier. And it includes a facilitator guide and then a video where Eve moves you through the different pieces of the workshop, makes it really easy to be something you could do it on your own, but my encouragement is that you do it with a group of people that you care about. So there's a resource and a next step for you offered by the BTS Center.
That is so awesome, Nicole, and relates directly to the next step that I was thinking of suggesting, which is to write your own flash fiction about a future that you'd love to inhabit. So listener, if you're not familiar with this term, flash fiction is basically an incredibly short story. So less than a page. Often it's just a few paragraphs, and it has a clear beginning, middle, and end. And so you could do this alone. You could sit down and write a piece of flash fiction that describes the future you'd love to inhabit by yourself. But I also recommend doing this either with a friend or with a group of friends, and then reading your flash fiction aloud to one another. If you're feeling extra excited after doing it, you could post parts of it on your social media if you're on social media. Or if you do it with a group, then you could decide to turn your group of stories into a little zine that you can print out and share with other people.
Like
I noticed
all of
that,
us. Autumn and I want to see these flash fiction
you can
pieces.
share, send it to us, send it to the world. But I think it's so important to invite others to create visions of new realities and to also be in this process of imagining them together. So think about, whether it's this exercise or whether it's the resource that was developed for the BTS Center that's available on the Leadership Commons. Just think about how can you bring this kind of exercise into your faith community, your team meetings, the places where you gather with others. I think you'll notice how much vision and possibility is unleashed when you actively practice imagining together.
Love it.
Okay. So we'd love to hear what you're creating or discovering. Please email us at podcast@thebtscenter.org or leave a voice message at 207-200-6986. And who knows, your insights might ripple out through future episodes.
Absolutely. Climate Changed is a podcast from the BTS Center where we are cultivating spiritual leadership for a climate-changed world.
You can find transcripts, discussion guides, and now full-length video episodes, plus bonus material. Explore more at thebtscenter.org and climatechangedpodcast.org.
Stay connected, share this episode, and reach out anytime. Autumn and I Would love to hear from you.
And as we close, here's a blessing for today. May you be imaginative. May you be creative. May you feel connected to one another in your vision of a new world.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Nicole. Coming up in the next episode of Climate Changed.
When you're losing your ground, when you're losing your sense of hope, what becomes your ground? What are the values that you want to be living out in your life? It's a dirty process, like in the best way. None of us have answers in this time. We're all just figuring it out together.